Are teachers paid enough?
I think when you look at how teachers' pay has decreased significantly over the decade, that is making it challenging, particularly in specialist areas, to recruit teachers. The last Labour government did a lot of work to increase teacher pay. We're in a very different economic climate at the moment. Although we did just bring in the 5.5%, we accepted the peer review body recommendation of 5.5%, which I think is an important first step towards a better pay deal overall. But the economy is in a pretty difficult situation at the moment. That's the challenge.
Right, this is obviously going to be a North East love-in, so I'm going to kick off. And I mean, it's an enormous amount we want to get through, but you're making progress on the childcare rollout. One of the things that many of us are concerned about is there simply isn't enough high-quality provision of childcare. What are you doing to tackle that?
It is a big challenge. I mean, early years and childcare is my number one priority. I was clear about that from opposition, and I'm clear as Secretary of State that it's why we'll make the single biggest difference to children's life chances.
Why is it your number one priority?
So in the time that I was Shadow Education Secretary, no matter where I went, whoever I was speaking to at whatever phase of education, secondary schools, vice-chancellors at universities, they would say, if you can do something, get it right in the early years. And all the evidence points to that as well, that we know lots of children arrive at school having already slipped behind and they don't make up that progress. So high quality early education is a really critical part of that. Now, as you say, we've got that rollout that we inherited from the last government, not without its challenges. You know, I've been clear with parents that it's not going to be plain sailing, but I want to do absolutely everything I can to make it work. But we won't be able to guarantee that parents will be able to access their first choice place. What we are doing is working to deliver on our commitment around primary nurseries, so more provision of nursery classes within primary schools.
Yeah, because it's such a huge problem. Like, so many people are not able to get back into work because even if they can afford a nursery place, they can't even get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a joke, isn't it?
And in some places, you're talking about one place for 3 children, and it's bigger in some areas. So there are some really big challenges. That's why the plans that we have around primary nurseries is about looking at those areas where we've got cold spots and the role for government in addressing where effectively there has been market failure in responding to that. Now, it's also the quality of the provision that's really important, and there's a need to kind of reform the system overall. So around support for the workforce, around qualifications and training, that's got to be a big part of what we do. And if I were to start over, I wouldn't start from the system that we've got right now. Bits have been added onto it over time, and it's not a coherent enough system. That's part of the challenge, and it's not really well aligned with primary schools either. So we've got to sort that bit too.
I mean, in terms of the time that's going to be required to get high quality provision up there, can you be confident that the timetable that's been set out for subsidised access to childcare can be delivered?
We're doing everything we can to make it a success. We've been working over the summer on the further expansion that we've just seen in September. September 25 is going to be a bigger challenge because of the scale up that's required. I think alongside that, there are no kind of quick fixes to the longer term challenges that we face. I think also when we get to September 25, we will be in a situation where the taxpayer is paying for 80% of the childcare market. Are we really using that input to best effect for children's life chances? So as you say, there is a really good argument around opportunities to work for parents, around those work choices. But for me, it's also about life chances for children. And that's the bit I think that's been missing in the conversation about how you ensure that all children get a great start, and early education, really high quality early education, is a crucial part of that.
So my daughter is just about to turn 5. She's just gone into school this month, into a state school. And I'll be honest, I kind of have lost my faith in our education system. Not the teachers, I think they do an amazing job, but in terms of, I still think we silo kids and decide whether they're clever or thick based on how they do academically. I'm already seeing that already with the academic pressures on her, and she's just 4. Similarly, you see a lot of entrepreneurialism squashed in schools. You see the uniforms are still dead pricey. You know, what are you going to change that?
On uniforms, yes, absolutely. We've got legislation that will be setting out that we commit to in our manifesto. It costs parents an absolute fortune. Schools are insisting on far too many branded items that just aren't necessary. I think children can be smart, but that doesn't have to cost parents the earth. So absolutely action around that. Also, We've got a commitment to deliver breakfast clubs in all of our primary schools. We know it would be a big help for parents at the moment who are finding, it really tough. But alongside that, again, the evidence is clear about the benefits for attendance, for outcomes, and for children, I think, especially after the pandemic, to have time with their friends, to have that time at the start of the day, to socialise, to chat, to develop all of those skills that are important.
But you had free school meals, didn't you, when you were at school? Did you not think, actually, let's go the whole hog and get rid of any stigma around food in schools and think, just make food in schools free for everyone?
I mean, that does cost an awful lot of money.
But it's an investment, isn't it? Because you know yourself, the evidence is there. If you're fed well in school, it might be the only hot meal some kids are getting. If they're fed well, they'll learn well and they'll go on in life and do better.
So I think it's a mark of failure that as a country we've got so many children who are receiving free school meals, because that's as a result of low household income. And we've seen a big increase in the number of children receiving free school meals. I think on the stigma point, there's a lot that you can do to make clear that there isn't a distinction between children who are receiving free school meals and where their parents are paying, especially at secondary level. That's quite easy. A lot of schools will have systems where you pay with a fingerprint or a card and you can't tell the difference. But for me, actually rolling out breakfast clubs in all of our primary schools, the evidence is really clear about the impact that would have. And children get a meal at the start of the day, but they also get all of the benefits that come. And it's, the Education Endowment Foundation have looked at this. There's really strong evidence around attendance, behaviour, and good outcomes.
I mean, we've been looking in a special podcast at the scandal of too many kids being failed when they're put into care. One of the really striking trends over the last 14, 15 years has been the massive decline in support for families that are struggling when kids are young. And it's been put to me by a number of people working in this field that there is now a doom loop, that because the money isn't going in to supporting struggling families that might be struggling with alcoholism at home, mental health issues, families disintegrate, kids have to be taken out. They're then put into these incredibly expensive private sector provided homes. Do you as a government have plans to do more early intervention, which if you do, that's a bit like the argument in the health service. You invest in helping people to be healthier. You don't have to spend so much money on hospitals. You invest in keeping families together. Inevitably over time, the cost of residential care for kids will be lower because fewer kids will be going into residential care.
I agree entirely that it is a scandal. What we see at the moment, we're talking about children and young people who've often been through incredibly traumatic childhood experiences, can no longer stay in the family home. And that's why we will be setting out plans very soon, a number of measures that we intend to take around legislating, particularly where it comes to excess profits that are being derived.
Yeah, because Wales and Scotland have both committed to completely getting rid of any profit making from children's homes. So are we going to do that in England as well?
You won't have long to wait to see the measures that we're setting out. We'll be doing so very soon. So there's a limit to what I can say now about the precise nature of those measures.
But you've used the word excess profit.
Yes.
So as a minimum, we can expect that even if there is private sector provision from private equity or other kinds of private sector firms, in the future, they will not be able to earn what we would call rip-off profits.
Yes, we will be tackling that and looking to better regulate the sector overall. We are spending a lot of money as a country on some really poor outcomes for very vulnerable children. And that goes to the wider question that you just presented there about where you spend your money. We are doing far too much in terms of crisis intervention much later down the line. We are not doing enough as a country to provide the support that children and families need much earlier, but also the greater support that is required around foster care, around kinship care, and making sure that wherever possible, children can remain within a stable family home.
Can I just ask you on that? The numbers of foster parents have collapsed.
Yeah.
And yet there are large numbers of actually parents who would provide foster care. What's gone wrong?
You're right, the numbers we've seen a big drop. We're doing a lot of work in the department to try and respond to that and also to increase the number of foster carers. I think also some of the work I've seen that councils have been doing about bringing some provision in-house is really important too. So one of the first visits I did as Secretary of State was to a children's residential home in Derby, where the local authority had brought that provision in-house in order to make, because there will always be some children who cannot, because of the very complex nature of what they've experienced and often some quite big behavioural challenges there. They will need more specialist care, but we have to make sure that that's really high quality. And I think part of what we're looking at through the legislation is how we can support local councils to work together on this to provide better provision, not being so dependent, especially on privately equity-backed provision.
As Ofsted have said themselves, they are in charge of often the foster agencies, they're in charge of some of the SEND providers, they cover every aspect of a vulnerable child's life, don't they? So
and something like a quarter of local authorities are saying the escalating costs of their childcare responsibilities are putting them on the brink of bankruptcy, of collapsing.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. But I think crucially, it is also not delivering good outcomes for young people. I mean, you look at the longer term prospects for young people who've been through the care system, and they're really, really terrible. So as well as addressing what we need to do now around young people, where the state does have to step in, we need to do more to honour our responsibilities as a country to people who've been through the care system.
So is it going to change then?
Yes.
And can I just ask, the other thing that really shocked me when we started doing this investigation was the kids in unregistered homes. So kids who have totally fallen through the cracks end up in homes that, again, Ofsted themselves have said are unsafe and unsuitable, can be miles away from where they're originally from. And they're kind of left to fend for themselves.
It's sort of worse than that in the sense that it is the young people who need the most professional support.
Yeah.
The private sector providers are saying these are too complicated for us. And so you get these unregistered, unregulated providers who are being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds effectively to act in the way that, well, in the old days, you would have called them borstals. They're basically locking these kids up.
And we don't, on top of that, Ofsted have admitted they don't know how many there are of them, which is, that must frighten you.
It does. All of this is, appalling, genuinely appalling, not least when you consider the young people that we're talking about, the experiences that they've had up until this point in their lives and why it's so crucial they get the right support. I am speaking with Ofsted about all of this, about whether they've got the powers that they need, whether we've got the regulation right, with the new Chief Inspector who took up post at the start of the year. So again, the legislation that we're looking to set out as soon as we can will be about responding to what we're talking about here.
I noticed as well there's kind of pilots happening, government pilots around Kinship and things like that. Can you tell us any more about them in terms of what they are and how they're going? Because
it's obviously way better, even if kids have to be taken away from their parents, if they can live with their grandparents or an aunt and uncle, that is a way preferable solution, most people would say.
Kinship carers do an absolutely amazing job and rightly tell me that they don't feel they get the recognition or the support that they need. So it's sometimes about the support that they need, because obviously it's a big responsibility to take on, the raising of a child, perhaps a family member, or sometimes it can be family friends who step in. So I'm speaking with organisations, working with kinship carers about the support that they need, but also how we move to a system where we support and encourage kinship carers to take on responsibility for children where they can't remain with their birth parents, because we just haven't got the system kind of tilted in the right direction to provide that level of support.
There's a couple of other related issues. So you'll know Josh McAllister did a report on all this for the last government, now a Labour MP. He made, I thought, two quite powerful points to me. One is, if we as a nation can find, hundreds of thousands of families to look after Ukrainian refugees, why can't we do something similar when it comes to our own young people who don't have homes? So is there any chance, as it were, of a sort of national campaign, a bit like, encouraging people to take in refugees to actually become foster parents. And the other thing he talks about, which again I thought just made a lot of sense, you talked about encouraging local authorities to work together. He thinks an alternative approach to residential care, as and when we need it, is to have local authorities club together and build collectively owned, publicly owned residential care centres so that they can, in a sense, share their resources.
So some of that work is happening, but I think there's further to go. And again, we're looking at how we make that a reality and the legislation that will underpin it. I think in addition to that, for me, it's not just about councils directly delivering services, but often there are some really good examples where they've partnered up with charities, with other organisations to do that. So there is expertise that's out there that sits beyond councils that I think we need to consider. On foster carers, I think that's a good challenge. I think there are lots of people out there who would want to provide that support, would be interested in becoming foster carers, but find it too complicated, the system too drawn out. We've got to make it work more effectively.
I know you've talked a lot about Ofsted and the role of Ofsted and what they're going to be doing. And, one of the big things that was announced is that we're not going to have these one-word summaries anymore. It's going to be more of a report card system. And obviously, it's so hard when you're a parent trying to pick a school. Is this going to make things more transparent? Because it's great that it's not going to be one word anymore, but is a report card going to tell us much more when you're trying to pick?
So I did think it was important to move away from those 1 or 2 word grades. I don't think you can reduce down the work of a school, its strengths, its areas for improvement into that one or 2 word judgment. And I think there is wide support for making that change. In terms of the report cards and what comes next, I'll be honest, we've got a challenge in making sure we get to the right design around that we capture the right information and how we use it as a focus for schools to improve as well. So I want areas of strength to be identified, but I also want it to be clear about areas where schools need to make change happen.
But schools get that. So when they do an Ofsted assessment, they will then get a lengthy report telling them all that. But it's more, and so the schools themselves will be able to get that information, but it's more parents, like where do they go to find out?
So this is partly about giving more information to parents. I've read lots of Ofsted reports as a parent and obviously as Secretary of State. I don't think they always tell you a great deal of information about where a school needs to do more. And I think, just to be clear, that accountability is really important around our schools. This is not about, letting everything just happen in its own way, because my concern is that I want to make sure that we've got high and rising standards for all of our children. That matters the most to children from working class backgrounds and disadvantaged children. And that's where you do need really strong accountability to make sure schools are doing everything they can. Schools can't do it alone. So schools have got an important role to play. But, there are so many problems that sit beyond the school gate. And that's where government has to step in, especially around issues like child poverty.
And when you say higher standards, what does that mean? Because that is my kind of word where I think she just means better exam grades.
And can I just sort of pick up on that? I mean, you were talking about how early you're finding in the case of your own daughter that they're sort of basically, evaluating academic ability. In your manifesto, you talk about the importance of making sure that schools provide better art provisions, better help with all the creative skills. How quickly are we going to see a rollout of more music, more art, actually better physical education as well in many cases is needed?
So we've launched a curriculum and assessment review. That's underway. There'll be kind of wide engagement with parents, with education sector and with others. That'll be happening from pretty soon. I don't think it's one or the other in terms of, do you make sure children leave school having got a strong foundation in the maths and English and the breadth? I think the two have to come together, and I don't accept that it's one or the other. And to the point about high standards, I don't think it's good enough that 1 in 4 children leave primary school without having reached the required standard in English, for example, or in maths.
Sure, no, it's a disgrace. We all agree with that. But
and that's about high standards. And because they then arrive at secondary school and they've already slipped behind. What we're thinking about is the different stages in a child's life. Where is it that we need to step in and give that extra support? Because if you leave primary school having not got to where you need to be, chances are you're not going to go on to get what you need to progress in your life, whether that's a university, an apprenticeship, the world of work. It holds you back the rest of your life.
But you still need a massive cultural change in schools. I mean, we're living through this artificial intelligence revolution. The skills that people are going to need far more than 25 years ago are to do with creativity, resilience, adaptability. And lots of schools are simply not set up to help children acquire those absolutely vital assets.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason for our curriculum review. I would say that I think in a lot in that space is just quite uncertain as to where we're going to be. I think there's so much uncertainty around use of technology and AI. I think there are some great opportunities within schools around how we use technology, especially around dealing with some of the pressures that staff would face around marking and assessment, and how we can have learning that is more tailored to individual children's needs. And that's why we've launched a process of investment so we can get the right tools. We need to do that carefully. We want to make sure that they're safe and effective. And we've launched a programme to get investment to support technology companies around that.
That is my beef. So you know this, Bridget. I spend my life going into schools where they're working with kids who do not have the structure in their lives to be able to do well in these really formal, academic, often memory tests, and if you look at maths and English, every single year, you've got a third of kids failing. They're not getting the grade that's required for them to continue in education and training. So they have to resit it. And it's not just about them not being able to do the test, it's about how they feel in themselves. They're being told they're thick, essentially. And, we meet CEOs and people all the time who'll say to us, they'll be running a big business and then they'll say, but I did rubbish at school, I'm thick. And I hate that. I just feel like we just silo people based on, memory tests. And it's like, is that ever going to change? Like, one of the ideas that I think, I've spoken to various college leaders about this is, could we not have maths and English as some type of rather than a kind of purely academic thing, it's more like a functional maths, functional English test. It's like a driving test. You pass or fail. You can do it at any age, but, predominantly you do it at 16 to take you to the next level. And therefore, you can pass it, feel good about it, and it's much more relevant to your life, and you're more likely to get more people through than just all these people who come out thinking they're rubbish at English and maths.
Yeah, I'll take that as a submission to our curriculum assessment review. I'll pass it on to the chair. No, I think there is a good challenge there about especially what people kind of need if they haven't secured at the age of 16. So and 18 and then beyond. So I think we've got to move away from thinking that education is something that kind of ends when you leave school or college and you leave the classroom.
Totally agree.
And that's why we're setting up Skills England to make sure that we've got the right options right throughout people's lives to upskill and to retrain, because, we're talking about the changing nature of technology, the world of work. We need to make sure we've got good options for people to take on those new opportunities as things change very, very rapidly. And I think there is a real role for technology in how we drive the economy forward as well. So just to give one kind of brief example, I visited a foundry in Derbyshire during the election. It was just an amazing visit in so many ways. They were doing loads of brilliant work around robotics. And I said I was meeting some of the apprentices as well, are you not worried about what this will mean for the future of the company? They said, actually, no, it's made us more competitive and more productive, and we've secured more contracts because of the way we've been able to do things. Also, those apprentices didn't see things in kind of binary terms. They would just coming to the point of completing their apprenticeships, and a number of them were saying they were actually going to carry on and study for a degree subsequently because they wanted to progress in their career. I think it's about providing those routes through for people, particularly as the world of work changes, that what you kind of achieve at 16 or at 18 doesn't define everything that you then go on to do later on in your life.
That was the point I was trying to make about AI, not about how it's applied in schools, and obviously it can be applied in schools both to help with learning and indeed to help with admin. That's clear. But it was more that we are living through economic changes, which will mean that young people will be forced to adapt, arguably to change their careers several times in a working life that could be 50 years. And actually, I don't think many schools work with children on the ability to massively change course, assess information, work out what your needs are at a later stage in life, get new training, and get productive work.
So I think it's partly about schools, but I think it goes beyond schools, because for lots of those people, it will be what happens beyond that. And I don't think what we do right as a country is provide enough training and opportunities for people to upskill and to retrain. I mean, the numbers have fallen off a cliff in terms of opportunities.
Employers are not doing as much training as they were, and there's something like 7 million people in insecure work who need it.
And big drops in the number of apprenticeship starts for young people in particular. That's something that we've got to turn around.
And one of the things we were just actually talking to somebody about was this issue about whether or not for many young people, you're better off staying on benefits than doing an apprenticeship. Is that a worry?
It is, and I've heard similar concerns. I think there's also the apprenticeship starts are just not there in the same way. So we had the introduction of the apprenticeship levy. That coincided with the massive drop-off in the number of apprenticeship starts for young people. We're going to reform that, turn it into a growth and skills levy to make sure that we've got the apprenticeships, but also to the point about opportunities for adults to do short courses, modular learning, for those who've got what they need at that point in time, but where their job is changing. If you're a mechanic, for example, but you need to be able to service electric vehicles, you don't need to do your whole apprenticeship all over again, but you do need the chance to top up your skills.
But that needs investment in further education, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, that's fallen off a cliff as well in terms of funding for FE. You can't get the evening classes that you used to be able to. And again, that's a big travesty for people who leave education not feeling like they got much from it, but later on in life want to go back into it. It's really hard to get back into. The number of people in older life as well going to university has dropped.
Yeah.
So there's a real problem with people, as we say, kind of being left behind.
There is, and FE is an area where we, haven't done this well in terms of investment as a country. I think the sector, that said, I think individual colleges, when I visit them, are doing some really innovative work with employers in particular and are really kind of connected to their local economies. I agree completely about how important FE is in particular for people that want to go back into education. I had a fairly straightforward journey in that I got what I needed, had a kind of straightforward journey through education. Lots of the people I was at school with didn't have that straightforward experience, and it was the opportunity to do an access course or to go back to college on an evening that opened up a world of opportunities. And I am concerned about the drop in mature students.
Because I talk to these colleges and visit all these brilliant FE colleges all the time as well. And fundamentally, it is money they need because they're more expensive, these courses, because of the kit they need to do the vocational qualifications. It's much cheaper to put on an A level than it is, a BTEC or a GNVQ in lots of cases. Will they get more money?
So I won't betray the secrets of what we're asking of as part of our discussions around the spending review. And we've got a budget coming up next month. In addition, that aside, the growth and skills levy is an opportunity for how we use FE to deliver some of that training that employers need. Because equally what you will see, as I see, you kind of go during the day, you see the kit that's being used. Often there's been some really, impressive investment in capital. And then the kit kind of sits there on an evening, on a weekend and isn't used. Equally, you speak to apprentices who are doing some amazing work using some cutting edge technology, manufacturing developments. They then go back to their workplace. The people that they're with day in, day out have no access to any of that ongoing training. So the changes we want to make around the Growth and Skills Levy and Skills England are about how we use what we've got and lever in that money that's already there, but is currently not being used as well as it should be.
People are worried, though, from the businesses and things I've talked to and the college leaders I've spoken to, about that money just being used within the company to, just do a bit of ad hoc training here and there and not really be meaningful and to help those people who genuinely's jobs are under threat.
There will be clear parameters set around it. Skills England will set that out in terms of how we make sure the money is well used. What we've also got to do as we publish our industrial strategy as a government is align those two things. So how we focus on those areas where we've got skills gaps, but where we've also got opportunities to grow the economy in some of those new emerging industries and technologies.
Yeah, because if you as a party want to build 1.5 million homes, there's currently not enough people in the construction sector to do it, are there? There's a huge skills gap.
So, and our colleges, further education colleges, will have a critical role to play in how we make sure we've got the training and the workforce we need to build those homes, absolutely.
And in terms of preparing young people for the world of work, and now I'm going to talk about one of my vested interests.
It's not a book, is it?
No, this case it's not. It's Speakers for Schools, the charity I set up a long time ago. One of the things Speakers for Schools does is provide high quality work experience to young people from state schools, particularly disadvantaged kids. Your manifesto says that it will be a universal entitlement for young people to get work experience. What you don't talk about is, in the manifesto, whether you're really talking about something pretty basic, a sort of box-ticking exercise, which could be a really limited Zoom call or something with an employer, or whether you're talking about the kind of thing that we do, which is we organise 4 residential days often, young people going into a workplace, meeting managers, being set challenges, really understanding about what work is from the age of sort of 15 to 17. We think that kind of high quality experience of the world of work is incredibly important in terms of actually helping young people to know what they want to do and what they might not want to do in life. So what are your plans in this area?
So our commitment is to 2 weeks worth of work experience for all young people. So that doesn't mean 2 weeks in one go. It means, as you just described there, perhaps trying different things over a period of days. I think it is incredibly important that all young people get access to high quality careers guidance, but also work experience too, because sadly, otherwise what happens is that if you know somebody or you've got a family connection,
that's why
if
we
you
set it up
don't,
at Speakers for Schools, because the nepotism was rife and disadvantaged kids just couldn't get access to the workplace.
Yeah, and we've got to make sure that young people, I mean, there are so many challenges about kind of wider inequality, but I want young people to see the opportunities that are out there, that they are for them, and it shouldn't be limited by whether you happen to know someone that is a director in a company or whether you happen to have, a family friend who works somewhere. That's what we've got to change now. This is going to be easy or straightforward, but we are committed to delivering this, to rolling it out as quickly as we can. But we need employers to come with us on this, and we need employers to step up and say we're
Talk to us.
prepared
We've
to do
got
it.
loads of employers.
Well, we've got some, but we need more, and that would be my plea to businesses. Like they say quite correctly, they've got skills gaps, they need new workers to come through. But equally, if young people don't know those careers are there, they're never going to think about studying what they need to in order to take up those opportunities.
It's an important point.
Well, whenever I have worked with schools on that kind of area, like I used to run this event in a school in Middlesbrough where I'm from, with lots of the kids who are, you would class as potential NEETs, not going into education or training or jobs. And the thing that I came up against was always the curriculum never gave us time to properly do stuff in the school. So, I used to do this speed dating thing where businesses or employers would come in and pitch to the kids what their business was and why they should work for them. And it was, covered all different sectors. And it was really good because the kids were like, oh, I never knew there was jobs doing that in hospitals. I thought everyone was just a doctor or whatever else. But in the end, the head teacher was like, we're so having to fulfill all these curriculum Ofsted review things. We can only put it on sports day. And so then sports day, you lose half of the kids who are doing all the sports stuff, who probably need this career stuff too. So it was really hard to get in. So I had all the businesses interested and I had the teacher interested, but it was the rigid framework of the Ofsted assessment. The head teacher would say to me, Steph, I'm never going to get assessed on that bit, so I need to focus on getting those kids English and maths, which I know is important too, but it feels like such a kind of, a loss.
How do you create the space in schools for them to do these non-curriculum but vital activities?
So it is partly, as you say, about the accountability that sits around schools. And that's where I think we do need to think about how we capture what schools do well. And I think parents would be really keen to hear if their child's secondary school is doing a load of great work around careers. And that might be a factor in influencing a parent's decision.
So does that mean changing what Ofsted looks at?
Yes, so this is the process that we're going to go through, looking at the report cards. What is it that we think is important that parents know about what a school does well? What are the areas for improvement? I think the other big area where we need to do a lot more as a country and where we don't pay enough attention is around support for children with special educational needs and disabilities. Yeah. And that is, again, one area where I think some of the accountability system that we have right now isn't working in terms of supporting schools to serve their whole community and make sure that young people are able to access their local school as far as is possible.
But the gap between provision and need has massively widened. I mean, one of the things I think none of us quite understand why the demand for special educational support has gone up as much as it has, but it has risen dramatically, and there isn't the provision at the moment.
So it's complex in terms of, I think, some of what's driving it, and we could have a whole other conversation about that.
But in a nutshell, why do you think the need has gone up so much?
I think partly we're better at identifying need as a country. That's a good thing. I think alongside that, there were a series of reforms that were put in place back in 2014 that, for a range of reasons, I don't think really have worked for parents or for children, that have ended up in a very adversarial system where parents are chasing provision and where, for all that we're spending a lot of money as a country, outcomes aren't good and parental satisfaction is going off a cliff. So this is a really big challenge for us as a government. We're going to have to find a way of having an open conversation about what some of the challenges are here. I think a part of it has to be how we better equip mainstream schools to support children with a range of different needs. Where their needs can't be met within mainstream. We need to get the right specialist provision there. Sometimes it's about between the two. So I've seen some really good examples, especially on areas like autism, where having specialist provision within mainstream allows children to split their time, some time in specialist provision, some of their time with their friends, and other local children within their local schools. So, and I think that's what most parents really want, good options locally, because most children will be going to their local school.
Yeah, and keeping, as you say, people in mainstream education, so people don't feel like they're being segregated, I guess, based on their neurodiversity or whatever else their needs are, because that is a big problem, isn't it?
A big part of the gap is that teachers and school staff will tell me that they are supporting children with ever-growing need and more complex need, and they don't have the training or what they feel is required to really respond to that. So I think that's part of the challenge. And I think on the specialist sector, on Friday, I was at an amazing specialist school in my constituency that support children with some really profound learning needs. You will always need to retain that. But I think equally, some of the work that's going on there is really innovative and interesting and actually isn't being shared with mainstream schools as much. Like there's a lot, I think, the different parts of the system can do together and learn from one another.
Can I pitch another idea to you as you're doing all these reviews at the moment? And that is and again, it comes back to my beef, which I keep going on about this, idea of basically, I just want to get parity of esteem for vocational training as well as academic. And it just, however long I've banged on about it, it's still not there yet. And I went to a school where it was really connected to local businesses, and that made a huge influence on all the kids there. We understood the world of work from a young age, and this was a melting pot of kids from some really difficult backgrounds. So my idea is, could we not, in Ofsted's review of things, or in the way we kind of look at schools every year as league tables, can we not look at employability as one of the factors? Like, where do people go on to next? Because I think then you'll suddenly see like the UTCs, the University Technical Colleges, or the FE colleges start to rise up the ranks as options, because then it wouldn't just be about academics. It'd be about, look, that quite a lot of those people who went to that college went into trade and making loads of money as an electrician, as a plumber, as all these other things.
But I think on that, if it was going to be valuable, you'd actually want the data on where those young people ended up 5, 10, 15 years
Yeah, you do. Exactly.
later.
Could we not do
3
that?
years is not very interesting. But if you can find out where they were 15 years after they were at that school, that would be really interesting.
It would be really good to just see that along with what exams people got.
Because, of course, the top universities in the world all monitor that. That's how they sell their services to the brightest. But that data should be available to everybody about every institution.
I mean, I agree completely about the point in terms of parity between technical and vocational and academic routes. And we've still got a lot more to do as a country to get to a better place on it. I think apprenticeships are more highly regarded than they were in many ways more recently, but there's still a lot to do, and the numbers in terms of apprenticeship starts for young people have fallen massively. So it's all very good and well to say we want parity. If we're not actually providing the opportunities, then we're wasting our time. I think the point about how you use data is an interesting one, and you mentioned about universities and what they would do to track it. Part of the challenge in terms of how you value education is that some people might study some courses at university, for example, in some areas of art, although there are really great well-paid jobs there, that don't necessarily in the earlier phase lead to well-paid outcomes.
So I'd want to know that as a parent. So then that's fine. So
but also we don't think it's all about making money, but it's about having a satisfied,
just what they go on to do.
Satisfying life.
And we do know some of that information, but I think it's a question about, do we just value things purely in economic terms, or is it just a good thing to have?
No, but just what they do next would be lovely to know.
It would be. I think the other challenge I would say, however, is that sometimes it's a factor of the local economy more than just what you've necessarily studied.
Yeah.
So there are just fewer graduate jobs in the northeast of England.
But then again, wouldn't it be, you want to know that, don't you? So that's useful information. If I want to see that however many people have had to move to London, like we've both had to do in our career at various points to get on, it's like, again, one of the other things I come up against are parents who'll say, I want my child to go to university because that'll be the best thing for them. And it might not be, but they've just been told by society. And, I'm sitting in this office now, in your office. I've sat in this office, as I'm sure you have, loads of times banging on about this to education secretaries, and I've not seen any difference.
Well, we'll have to
I know you're just in the job. I know you're just in the job, so you've got a bit of time to go. But.
So there's 2 or 3 other things we need to talk to you about. One is we are now into the new term. Have you yet got any data about whether kids are leaving the fee-paying schools and going to state schools in any kind of numbers?
We've got nothing to support that. No, I mean
are you asking for data from the schools themselves?
I mean, the Department for Education tracks kind of pupil movement. We keep an eye on what's going on locally. I think, as you'll know, the work that the Institute for Fiscal Studies did in this area was very clear that they don't anticipate large movements.
That's a forecast as opposed to,
well, of course,
forecasts are sometimes right, sometimes they're wrong. I assume, because you don't want there to be, suddenly in any particular, local authority, a particular school saying we just can't cope with the numbers who want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, the changes, obviously haven't yet taken effect. We've made clear our intention over a number of years to levy VAT on private school fees.
But it's coming in at the beginning of the year, isn't it?
That's the intention.
The calendar year is what I mean. I don't mean next academic year. Yeah.
I think this is a straightforward political choice. I want to invest more money in our state schools. If we want to do that, then we've got to find ways of raising that money.
Sure, I don't think we're making the point about that it's necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just we assume practical consequences, and we're just trying to find out what they are.
Yeah, I've never accepted the argument about frankly, some of the scaremongering that the private schools lobby have put about in terms of movement. Private school fees have gone up massively over the last 20 years. They've priced themselves out of the reach of lots of middle-class parents who would have previously thought about sending their children to state school. I mean, last time I checked, the average fee for a year at a private school was in excess of £17,000 a year. That is a lot of money. I mean, that is way beyond the reach of the vast majority of people that I represent. If parents want to choose to send their children to private school, that's absolutely their choice. I just don't think there should, in effect, be a taxpayer subsidy for that.
Do you care if kids leave the private sector and come into the state sector for education?
I think that's a choice for parents. I wouldn't want, to see, that's a choice in terms of how they do that. The fees are already, high, and we're talking about people who've got the money to spend on.
I mean, my argument historically, I've been on the record for I went to a comprehensive, my kids went to comprehensives. One of the reasons I set up Speakers for Schools is because I want to champion state schools, particularly comprehensives. And my argument has always been that the pernicious aspect of the two-tier system here, some fee paying, the majority state education, is that when you have a two-tier system, quite often, if the middle-class parents aren't in the state system, they're not there lobbying for higher standards. So wouldn't you think it's a good thing to actually have more middle-class parents in schools, pressurising the schools to perform better?
I don't think it's just middle-class families who want higher standards.
No, it's not. But
it's like everyone does. Everyone wants their kids to do well at school.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that is true, though, of everybody, is it?
Well, no, obviously there's always some parents who don't care, but often those parents are the ones who are disengaged themselves with the education system because they themselves had a terrible time, so they think it's not important. And there again, the people we need to get back into the system to make them value what you get from schools again.
But what I'm saying is broadly, don't you think it would be better for state schools if they were more representative of Britain itself, which would mean you'd have both rich kids and poor kids in the same schools rather than ghettos?
Well, I think, having a state, I went through the state system. My children go to state schools. I really value the state system. Sending my children to a private school was not something I ever would have considered. But some parents make that choice. They can continue to do so. But
that's a politician's answer. I'm asking you about what you think is good for the culture of the United Kingdom.
I think it's up to parents to decide.
You genuinely believe that?
I genuinely believe it. If they want to send their children to private school, that's absolutely their choice. What I just want to make sure is we've got enough money going into state schools, because that's where the majority of children go to school. What I would observe, in addition, however, is that we do spend, and I'm happy to talk about it with you, by the way, we do spend rather a lot of time talking about a relatively small number of children in the private sector.
We have enormous privilege and dominate Oxbridge still. I mean,
and it's because of that. It's because of that reach that we talk about it so much. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I think it's the right thing to do.
Many would say that's pernicious.
Shouldn't we just get rid of them, though? Shouldn't we just not have a two-tier education system and everyone has the same chance and the same education in life? Wouldn't that be good?
Well, I wouldn't start a system off with the way that we've ended up for a range of reasons. I think the same is true of selection, but we've got that system. I want to just make sure we're driving up standards across the board.
On a semi-related issue, I would say, and I'm not asking you to announce this year's pay rise for teachers, but relative to other jobs that people do, are teachers paid enough?
I think when you look at how teachers' pay has decreased significantly over the decade, that is making it challenging, particularly in specialist areas, to recruit teachers. The last Labour government did a lot of work to increase teacher pay. We're in a very different economic climate at the moment. Although we did just bring in the 5.5%, we accepted the peer review body recommendation of 5.5%, which I think is an important first step towards a better pay deal overall. But the economy is in a pretty difficult situation at the moment. That's the challenge.
But if you accept, and I think everybody around this table would agree on one thing, which is your most important economic policy for the long term is education, then you need absolutely the best people providing that education. And so that decline, over 10 years, it's not just over 10 years. When I went to school, I grew up in North London, my teachers could live locally. No teachers at the school I went to back then could possibly afford to live locally anymore. So the relative position, the relative economic position of teachers has declined massively over decades at a time when we need them more than ever.
I think that challenge is particularly acute in some areas, as you've described. That's partly a feature of housing costs as well as salary. But the last Labour government did do a lot to increase teachers' pay. What I'd say is that whilst teachers will absolutely push me on pay, and they're right to do so, what they push me even more on is just the wider challenges around workload, what we ask of them, how we make their job easier, and the support that we give them. So I think, the 5.5% pay rise is a really important first step. But what they will say to me time and again is, how do we make teaching more flexible? There's still not enough flexibility. That's why lots of women in particular in their 30s leave teaching having had children. Issues around workload too. Piloted
at the moment is this sort of 9-day fortnight for some teachers. Is that a good thing?
I think it's really interesting. And Academy Trusts have obviously got some flexibility around what they do. I want to look at examples like that to think about how we can expand options around flexible working. So we've already been, looking at areas like teachers being able to do some of their planning and marking time from home, not insisting that they have to do that within school. But I'd probably just also go back to where we started talking about early years and childcare. Absolutely, it's important our teachers get a good deal. They've got a pay body. They've got trade unions who very loudly make the case for them. We look at early years workforce, often quite a low paid, undervalued part of our system, where we don't have the options around training, progression and qualifications that we need. That is an area that is really, really ripe for reform, and I want to turn around. So yes, absolutely teachers, but actually in our earliest years, where we know that the impact is greatest in terms of high quality education, we don't have, the right options there for people to train, to upskill, and to take on teaching qualifications as a part of that process.
I'm seeing that myself through the nursery and things my daughter went to. It was majority run by teaching assistants. There was only one qualified teacher, and they were working just as hard as the teacher, so there's definitely an area there. One thing I just want to ask you before we wrap up is just homeschooling. I've noticed, and I don't know, I've not got the data to necessarily back this up, but in terms of anecdotally, I'm hearing more from friends who work in teaching and things about they're losing a lot of kids to homeschooling, and there's talk of influencers making it trendy now to homeschool. What are you doing in that sense to make sure we're not losing it? Yeah, we're losing a generation of kids to necessarily. And I'm not saying all homeschooling is bad, but it's about making sure they're getting just as good an education.
So we have seen an increase, and again, parents have the right to homeschool their children, and many do so, providing a really high quality education. My worry, and it's been a concern from lots of people, including the Children's Commissioner for a long time, is that we don't have visibility of children who are not in school. That's why, again, we've got a commitment to legislate around a register of children not in school. So we know where children are. We can make sure that they're being well looked after, because sadly, there can be cases where parents will withdraw their children from school, perhaps where a safeguarding risk has been identified, in order to keep them away from wider supervision, because it's often teachers and school staff who will pick up if a child is arriving at school, perhaps with an injury, or if they're not being, properly well looked after and they're looking dishevelled. They can work with parents around that. So lots of parents homeschool incredibly well. They've got nothing to be concerned about in this space. But I think we've just got a responsibility to ensure that we know where children are.
Yeah.
Totally right. I think we'd all agree with that. Well, look, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
What was an absolutely fascinating conversation. There's tons more, actually. I think we would both like to ask. So you'll have to let us back in again at some point.
Yeah, and also, I can't wait to hear what all these announcements are going to be. So we'll be knocking on your door once they're out to find out more about them. But thank you very much.
Thanks very much.